Chapter: The Stew Without a Name. Lila had been walking since dusk, the sky a bruised plum above her. The dunes whispered underfoot, shifting like breath. Somewhere behind the seventh ridge, the air changed, thickened with something almost sweet. Not quite smoke, not quite memory. She followed the scent, barefoot now, until she found a lone tent pitched in a hollow of moonlight. The fabric shimmered, stitched from rags of every century, lace, burlap, funeral veils. At its center, a cast-iron cauldron simmered on a silent flame. There was no firewood, no smoke, just a flame that bent inward. Behind the pot stood a figure draped in robes too long for the sand, face obscured by a hood made of wind. Lila cleared her throat. The figure didn't look up. "I smelled something," she said. Still silence. She stepped closer. The scent hit her harder now. Like soup left on the stove in a childhood she never had. She felt her knees go loose. The figure stirred the stew with a ladle carved from antler and silence. The liquid inside shimmered not with color but mood. Sometimes it was grief, sometimes longing, sometimes just the hollow ache of knowing you've forgotten something important. Lila knelt. Finally, the figure spoke without moving their lips. "What is fed is not always eaten." Lila blinked. "What's in it?" The chef did not answer. Instead, they plucked 3 items from beneath their robe and dropped them into the pot. Asterisk: a feather with teeth, a glass root that pulsed faintly, a wrinkled piece of paper that dissolved before it touched the surface. "You cannot eat this stew," the voice said again, more inside her than around her. "But if you inhale, gently." Lila leaned forward. The steam curled like old lullabies. Her eyes stung, her ribs pulsed. And suddenly she remembered not her mother's voice, but the shape of it. Not her father's face, but the shadow it cast at dusk. In a house that never was, with windows lit by the scent of this very stew. Tears rolled down her cheeks without drama. "Who are you?" she whispered. The figure turned slightly. A recipe passed down through longing instead of memory. The wind rose. The stew evaporated. When she opened her eyes again, the tent was gone. The sand beneath her was cool. But for hours, maybe days, the scent clung to her skin, feeding something behind her ribs that had always been hungry. Chapter: To those who have tasted the scent. It began the night after the stew. Lila had curled up beneath the salt-brush trees, her body heavy with a tired that felt older than her bones. The stars above flickered like held breath. As she drifted into sleep, the last thing she thought she heard was the hum of root glass bulbs vibrating softly beneath the earth. Then she dreamed. And in that dream, her tent flap stirred with no wind. A man stepped inside, thin, lips chapped, eyes full of something unspoken. He wore a baker's apron, stained with flour and something darker. In his hand, a ladle carved from wood and burnt at the edges. "I once followed that scent for 6 days," he said softly. "I lost my name somewhere in the dunes. Haven't needed it since." Lila sat up. The surrounding tent shimmered, walls made of memory. "Did you eat it?" she asked. The man laughed. "Not cruelly, just tired. You don't eat the stew, you let it find what you've hidden. You breathe it in, and something behind your ribs remembers what your mouth forgot to say." He looked at her with that same hollow ache she felt. "My daughter's name was Morel," he whispered. "I remember now." Then he was gone. The next night, another came. An old woman with petals braided into her hair. She smelled of riverbanks and ruined songs. "It came to me in winter," she said. "Boiled in a dream pot beside my dying sister's bed." She smiled once before she went. I think it was the stew. She handed Lila a scrap of parchment. On it, a list of impossible ingredients, a pinch of silence aged 43 years, 3 grains that remember thunder, and salt from weeping stones. Then she too dissolved. More came in the following weeks, a mute child who painted steam clouds on Lila's tent walls, a blind cartographer. who'd mapped out where scent turns to sorrow, a wolf who spoke in lullabies, a librarian who'd never eaten but had cataloged every recipe written by grief. Each one said the same thing before they vanished, greater than the stew feeds what language lost. By the seventh dream, Lila knew what she had to do. She would follow the scent again, but this time not to find the stew, to become it. Chapter: To brew a memory you never had. By the time the seventh dream faded, Lila had stopped asking if they were real. The visitors left no footprints, no ash, no waking proof. But the scent stayed. It clung to her fingernails, nested in her hair, sank behind her ribs like something gently weeping. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she walked. By moonlight, she gathered what she could. Not ingredients, echoes. A shard of mirror from a crumbling shrine. Moss grown between two gravestones that had once kissed. 3 drops of dew from a cactus that had never bloomed. None of it made sense, but it felt true. She remembered the old woman's parchment, now yellowing in her pack. The ink had faded, but the scent hadn't. It still smelled like the stew. Not food, but home. A home not yet built. When the moon reached its highest point, a sliver of silver whispering secrets, Lila found a hollow between the dunes. The wind there didn't howl. It listened. She built no fire. There was none needed. Instead, she placed a cracked pot clay, veined with hairline memory on the sand. Then a voice. Behind her, calm, familiar. You can't make it alone. She turned. It was the first visitor returned, the man with the burnt-edged ladle. But something was different now. He had eyes like hearth embers, a coat woven from dusk. His apron no longer bore stains, just stitched symbols, runes from kitchens long vanished. He stepped forward and knelt beside her. "There are rules," he murmured. "Not steps, not measurements. The stew. It brews in the space between." "Between what?" she whispered. "Between what you remember and what you regret." He reached into the air and plucked something invisible, a hum, vibrating between stars, and dropped it into the pot. Lila did the same. She poured in her silences. Her almosts. The name of the friend she never said goodbye to. The song her mother once hummed but never sang. The ingredients gathered themselves, a root that glowed when held with sorrow. A spice jar that whispered back the names of those who'd tasted it. A pinch of sleep she hadn't yet slept. Steam rose. It was slow, mournful, a ghost waltzing in reverse. And with it came something else, laughter, distant and brittle, the kind you only hear once and never again. A child's, or your own, from a life where you were never hurt. She stirred the pot once. The liquid inside was dark as sky just before thunder. Twice, it thickened, pulsed, a heartbeat in broth. 3 times. "Now," said the man, standing. "You breathe it in." Lila did. The scent wrapped around her. It didn't sting this time. It settled. And behind her ribs, something opened. Not a wound, not a scar, a door. It creaked open, slow and aching, and on the other side, voices, not clear, not loud, just there, laughing, singing, calling her name like they meant it. She fell to her knees, not in pain, but release. The pot was empty, the man was gone, but something remained. A heat in her chest, a recipe, not in her hands, but in her breath. She would never be the same, and now others would come, drawn not to the scent, but to her, because she had brewed the quiet stew, and once you've made it, you never dream alone again.